Hello and welcome back to Bitcoin with Jake. Today I'm speaking with Joe Hall. Welcome, Joe.
Hey Jake, how you doing?
I'm very, very well. I'm feeling a little homesick. I'm looking at you sitting in a decadent room with some green wallpaper and a Georgian property that reminds me of some similar things that my family grew up in over the years. So it's nice to speak to someone in England. And great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Honestly, it's a bit of a Bitcoin citadel that I'm sat in here. And there's a long story to it, but I just wanted to say before that I've loved your Africa focus the past two pods.
Okay.
With Farida and Master Wansai. They were great episodes. So I feel like I've got big shoes to fill here. And here I am.
No
in a
pressure,
Georgian
Joe.
mansion.
No pressure
Yeah.
at all. Yeah, I mean, and I love those conversations as well. It's so cool how, and Twitter's incredible for this, but within a few messages online, you can be speaking to someone on the other side of the world, and the stories that they have as to why Bitcoin's important are so different to some of the stories that I think it's important for. And I always think about asking people, well, what problems have you got? And one of those problems is like to be something that Bitcoin can solve. And so I'm sure this will come up in your story, Joe. So being a show about Bitcoin, let's start off there. So at some stage in your life, you have a friend somewhere or a sibling who said, mate, you better check this thing out. And you probably went, that looks like a load of shit. Take me back to that point or just after that when, you came across it and what was your story to Bitcoin?
Technically, there was three touch points like that. I guess you could say I was quite a slow learner and a slow adopter of Bitcoin. But the first one was back in 2011, just before going to uni, and a friend of mine was buying all sorts of amazing things on the internet on Silk Road, and I just thought this was the most amazing invention, this e-commerce website that you can review people for inevitably illicit substances. And I realized that he was paying for it with Bitcoin, and I tried to use it myself a few times, but I'm not very tech savvy, and I always struggled to actually acquire the Bitcoin. So it basically passed me by. And then, so that was like technically the first time that it came up in my life. And yeah, of course, I kicked myself and wish I'd invested then and paid attention. He actually did. And he is, I mean, he's pretty wealthy, but he was so young coming into it that he didn't grasp it, and obviously traded it away. And he still trades to this day for fun. But he's quite like, he's quite an anarchist, I guess.
Okay.
And then the second touch point, like proper one, was in 2018, sort of January time. I was surfing off the coast of Lisbon, and this Canadian fella with this amazing wetsuit and like an amazing board. And he just looked like a rich surfer, which is, in the surfer world, it's not that cool to be like this rich guy. Anyway, I was like, where'd you get all this money from, basically? And then he explained to me that he was taking some time off to go do like a herbal medicine university degree thing, like alternative teachings and all that. And he was a bit like hippie, like very surfer vibes. And he explained to me that he made all his money through Bitcoin. And so that sort of was another real world use case. But then when it finally set in, and I was like, okay, I get it now, was having done a bit of my own research. And that was in the Ivory Coast when my driver was driving me to work. Not because I was like super rich or anything, but just because that was just the setup we had while working there. And he was explaining to me that he was receiving Bitcoin from his son who's living in Paris. And, it was used as this remittance tool. And I was obviously quick to correct him. We were like, that's rubbish. No one actually uses this thing. It's, it's burning the environment and melting the ice caps and all these silly things. And I realized, oh, wait, maybe I'm wrong here. And I should really do some proper digging into Bitcoin rather than blockchain and all that. And so that was what, 2019, when the proverbial penny finally dropped. And I thought, oh, okay, this Bitcoin thing has some substance to it. And then from then on, I really dug deep. But I was in emerging markets around the world. So I was in like Tunisia, Morocco, Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago, the Ivory Coast. I always forget the countries I've lived in, which is really embarrassing. Serbia. I can't remember. I need to like look at my my LinkedIn or something to work out where I've lived.
That's cool though.
Yeah.
I mean, travel is it's probably the most liberating thing I've ever done. Like being able to get on a plane and pick up a bag and just leave, and you suddenly pop up somewhere new. It's different smells, different temperature. The people dress differently, they look different. There's different cultures, and it's the most fascinating thing I've ever done. So, now, epic to have had a job that took you to lots of places.
Mm.
I had a
That was
not
wicked. Yeah.
dissimilar experience living in Asia for a bit, but this isn't about me. This is about you, Joe. So we'll stick to that. So you mentioned you mentioned emerging markets. So what role took you to emerging markets? I assume that was with your career, or was that something that you were working on the side with, or?
Yeah, yeah. It was originally with my career. There's a French word. This is going to sound really pedantic. There's a French word called dépaysé, which means to be like, literally would translate as to be uncountryed. And I've always like loved this feeling of like, you know, when you go to a new place, you know, you're saying like, oh, new smells, sounds,
Mm,
people dress differently, and it's the idea of like being removed from your sort of habitual surroundings. And I really
mm,
like thrive in that, in those sorts of settings, and that's what I've always sort of loved. From a young age, I've always loved just being plonked somewhere random. I mean, like, okay, how are you going to survive this, or how are you going to
mm,
get out of this sort of situation? So originally, when I saw a job advert when I was 22, 23, I was in London. I was pretty depressed, and I was doing a sort of grad job, and I saw this job which said travel the world and get paid to do so.
mm.
And so in it, obviously,
Where
immediately
do
I
I
thought it was
sign
a
up?
scam. Yeah, well, I thought it was a scam. Obviously, I was like, "What is this new shit coin?" And but I applied and got flown out to Madrid and got through this weird interview process that was basically like what's it called, The Apprentice,
Hmm.
or do they call it The Apprentice in the US? I forget. You know, when you sort of go through
I know what
rounds
you
and they
mean, though.
eliminate
There's
you.
like a Donald Trump-esque bloke, because was it Alan Sugar
Correct.
does it in England, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're
And in
fired.
Madrid, it was a yeah, yeah. In Madrid, it was a French bloke who was equally charismatic and sort of boisterous and aggressive with his like interview style. And so by the end of the first 2 hours, four of us had been sent home. The end of the first day, another six had gone home. And by the third day of this interviewing process, it was just me and this other girl. And obviously, I should have seen this coming, but like the last round was we're sat in front of the CEO and the COO. They say, okay, sell me your colleague. And then, you know, they pick you based off how well you can sell your competitor, your adversary.
Wow.
And by these, you know, by the third day, you've gone through a lot together. And so there's a
Mm.
sense of, you know, survival that obviously brings people together. And I was there selling her away. And then it was actually quite nice because they ended up hiring both of us. And that sort of started this journey into, I don't know really how to call it, but it's, some people call it the industry, like between commas. And it's basically this form of sort of pseudo journalism where you get dropped into emerging markets around the world, and there's a guy and a girl, and then there's like the team that supports the guy and the girl in doing their job, and you'd go to visit CEOs and ministers. So, for example, say we're in Serbia, we would go and see the Ministry of Health, we'd see the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Defense. You take photos with them, you do an interview with them, and then with that content, you would then pitch pharmaceutical companies or schools or universities or whatever, and go to them and say, "Oh, we'd like to interview you as part of this report we're doing." And while there was some editorial content to what we were doing, ultimately you were like a supercharged sales team going around these countries. And I was chewed up and spat out by this industry quite quickly. Only survived a year there. Most people last like 6 months to a year, but those that stay in it for 2 to 3 years, you can do really quite well out of it. But it was this very unethical, horrible way of selling. But it also prepped me for the world, in the sense that you get dropped out in these random countries all over the world, and you have to learn really quickly how institutions work, how businesses interact with one another, and essentially how corrupted a lot of places are around the world too.
Mm.
Particularly, like yourself, I grew up in the UK, and we just assume that institutions are reliable. So along this journey, I think I was in some ways prepping myself for what Bitcoin solves.
Mhm.
And eventually I got picked up by a Bloomberg subsidiary, because they tend to pick some of these guys that work in this industry. And there's lots of books written about this industry thing. It's been going for about 50 years. And there are some amazing stories of people meeting with like dictators and networking with, Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or whatever, and then trying to sell them an advertisement off the back of an interview. So some really like far out stuff that happens. But yeah, eventually I got poached by this sort of English subsidiary of Bloomberg, which sell their research and content
Mhm.
to the big boss, which was Bloomberg. And with them, that's when I started my sort of journalism career in earnest. Because before that, I think it was more like sponsored content or advertorial work. And that's what took me around the real emerging markets, let's say. So that's places in sub-Saharan Africa, Trinidad and Tobago. I guess that's sort of on the cusp of being like an emerging country. the actual definition of these countries changes all the time. It's a very Western lens that people see it through.
Mm.
But it used to be called like third world, and then it became like impact countries, then emerging markets, then developing countries for a while as well. I don't really know, but yeah, it took me all around the world and allowed me to travel, and I still do that now with my work at Coin Telegraph, where I'm a reporter. So I like to write about all things Bitcoin, and I've been accused of writing pro-Bitcoin propaganda, which I wear as a badge of honor, and I was very happy when someone said that about me. And yeah, and I've sort of taken those skills that I acquired in the mainstream media world and brought them to I want to call it the Bitcoin world, but ultimately it's the crypto world, because I still work for Coin Telegraph. And yeah, through that I've traveled a lot too.
Awesome, Joe. Thank you for sharing all that. There's so many things I'd like to draw from, but just to pedal back a bit, remind me the name of the job advert you saw that took you to Spain. So travel the world and get paid for it.
Yeah,
Is that what it was?
effectively. I can probably find it somewhere in my notes.
That's all good, but it's interesting because some people would read that and go, "Fuck yeah, how do I apply?" And some people would read that and be like, "No way." And what intrigues me is the different types of characteristics of people. And the truth is, you applied for that job. It lasted for a year. You got through the recruitment process. You learned a ton, and then you actually did get a job that took you around the world and paid you. So it's kind of like, does that make sense? Like your experience with the Bloomberg subsidiary, you're being paid to go to the emerging markets. This is exactly what happened. So it's just, that's really cool. Like, you saw an opportunity, you followed it, and in a sense, here you are today. What I'd love to understand about that experience in emerging markets, and this is something, so I moved to Singapore when I was just 24 years old in 2012. And what was so refreshing about it was, and this is another reason why I love travel, is the perspective you get. Like when you grow up, you go to British school, you live in the UK, you're on the side of Europe, you are European ultimately. And, you have all these preconceived notions of global dominance and the heyday, and you're just fed this propaganda in hindsight, what it was.
Yeah.
But the perspective is a lot of other people in the world live their own lives, doing their own things, building their own businesses. They don't give a shit about a small island on the side of Europe. And that was actually very, very refreshing, I found. So perhaps just talk us through some of the perspectives you gained from going to these different countries, and like what were some of the things that were most impactful to you? You already mentioned corruption of institutions. Was that something that was particularly strong and resonated with you? Explain to me a little more about that experience.
Oh, for sure. And I think rightly so, about the whole, we are a little island that is trying to claim and sort of hold on to the significance that we had maybe 100 years ago. We need to move on and realize that no one cares about the UK or England anymore.
Nah, they don't. I
It's
mean, in Singapore, this place
mad.
is flying, and they do not England, like whatever,
Yeah.
And that's great
Yeah.
in some
Next.
ways.
Yeah. In terms of the corruption, I mean, in somewhere like Abidjan, I used to pay my coffee bribe every day on the way to work, where I get flagged down by one of the local policemen. I say that, between speech marks, because he'd see me, this white guy in a suit, on the way to work, and eventually we became quite friendly, and I would have a little chat, and I'd give him my euro on the way to work, and it became my little toll, and I'd expense that as my my corruption or my bribe on the way to work. So there's that levels of corruption where it's just societal, and you're just expected, like, that will go all the way up, as in the police managers and the government know that they don't need to pay policemen as much, because they will be bribing people on the street anyway. So there's this sort of informal economy, which is so large, but it's just so accepted. And there was a similar instance in Tunisia. Well, just looking at Tunisia GDP, 130% of its GDP is informal. So there's like one GDP, which is the formal stuff, which is, declared taxes and big businesses and things that are, documented for. And then there's the cash economy, which is larger than that existing economy.
Wow.
So it's kind of mind blowing when you think about it. And then I had one story of my ex-girlfriend in Mexico. Her dad was a restaurateur, and he was looking to open a fourth restaurant. And he was adamant about doing it all by the book, in terms of getting a liquor license, and in terms of getting all the necessary documentation you need to open a restaurant in Mexico City. And he got the liquor license dude to come around the first time. And the guy was like, okay, yeah, it all looks ship shape. Here's how much it's going to cost. And then, I would also like the 20 quid for me that goes into my back pocket, which we all know is part and parcel of living and doing business in Mexico City. And he was like, no, I'm not going to pay that. And he's like, well, okay, you're going to have to go to the higher ups. And so he went to he went to his manager, he went to the manager of that manager. And 2 years later, so he's been toiling away at this for 2 years. He eventually gets to like the head of food and beverages for the region of Mexico City, which is, 20 odd million people, really serious job with serious responsibilities. And he walks into the office and have this long chat, and the guy's really trying to empathize with my ex's dad, being like, oh yeah, I know how hard it is to run a restaurant in Mexico City, and this, that, and the other. And it comes to like actual documentation and signing it all. And he goes, okay, yeah, here's what I'll sign, here's what you'll sign. You can get your liquor license, you can start selling alcohol in your restaurant. And he's like, brilliant, thank you very much. They sign. He's like, and I'd also like my
$200.
The little yeah, exactly. And he's like, are you serious? Like, I've waited 2 years for this just to do it all above board, and it's still like endemic corruption.
Yeah,
It's just
wow.
so you can't really fight it in certain places. And again, it's where, I don't know, for me, Bitcoin comes in and it eradicates it all. It's this beautiful solution to it. Yeah, I've got countless examples of these weird sorts of corrupt
let's keep
things.
going through that, because this is one of the reasons I love this podcast. These are all small stories, but they add up to create your lens on why Bitcoin's important. So can you name a couple of other stories that spring to mind that you think Bitcoin solves, in a sense? And you've already mentioned that you had 3 touch points. Obviously everyone likes getting high at uni, but fuck, we didn't buy Bitcoin when we were at uni getting high. Damn, we should have done that. And then 2018, like, someone's actually clearly done pretty well because they're in a cool swimsuit. How the hell, what was it you said? Like a
Wetsuit, yeah.
a wetsuit, yeah. And then so 2019, Ivory Coast, and someone's actually doing serious remittance. Oh my God, that's cool. So it is always a evolution, in a sense. So yeah, do you have a couple more stories like that you can share? Because I
Yeah,
think
for
it's really
sure.
important, when everyone says Bitcoin fixes this, well, what's it fixing? And stories like this are very helpful to explain that.
Yeah. And for the Ivorian guy, Guillaume, who was my driver, so the best part about his story as well was that not only was he receiving money from his son in Paris, but he was also looking after it. And I was asking him, I was like, why are you leaving it like on your phone in a wallet? Why are you not, converting it into CFR, which is like the West African franc? And he was like, oh, well, because I know that no one can touch this. And I was like, wow, you really get it. Like, you really understand that this is, money that you can't debase, that no one can steal. It's inconfiscatable, or whatever the word is. And I don't know, I was in Tunisia once on the way to the airport, and I realized that once you cross through into the actual airport itself, you can no longer spend Tunisian dinars. And Tunisian dinars can't actually be exchanged, or it's very hard to exchange them outside of the country. So you're in the country of Tunisia, in the capital city, in its airport, and you can't actually spend them. So
Wow.
you're like, what is going on here? This paper, which 200 meters ago was worth £10, is now worth absolutely nothing. Or in Trinidad and Tobago, they replaced the $100 Trinidadian note with a plastic version. And so that, yeah, they essentially were upgrading their notes, which, again, when you just say that out loud, you're like, what, we're upgrading pieces of paper to be more realistic pieces of paper? But anyway, they went through this process, and the banks anticipated that this might take, a couple of months of people coming into the banks and swapping them, the old ones for the new ones. And they realized it was going to take about 2 years, because people had so much money at home under their mattresses, or stored away in hiding places. And I spoke to one guy who was queuing at the bank once, who had a wheelbarrow. And we've all seen that image. I'm sure you saw that image, Jake, at school, of the Weimar Republic, the hyperinflation, and like
The
they're
Germans
queuing with
walking
their
around
wheelbarrows.
with wheelbarrows of cash. Yeah, wow.
Exactly, yeah. And this was like 2019. And there's a guy queuing outside the bank with a wheelbarrow of $100 Trinidadian notes, which is about £6 or £7. And I was like, what's going on? Like, also, where do you get all this money? Do you not have to, like, is there not some sort of KYC AML thing for banks here? He's like, oh, well, I'm a priest, you see. And I was like, oh, okay. Is that your line, is it? And he's like, no, I'm actually a priest. He wasn't wearing like the collar or anything
Yeah.
like that. But it's obviously a very good way of getting away with the fact that you got lots and lots of dollars at home. And all these things with me, like, gosh, like, firstly, why do we have paper? Everything we do digitally now, and you bounce around most countries in Africa, they all have a smartphone.
Yeah.
Wherever you go, a smartphone nowadays can cost $40-50, and all of these people don't have banks. Like, why would they have a bank when an ATM fee costs you £3 or £4, which could be the equivalent of a day's work, when a money transfer would cost you don't know how much, and it might not get there instantly, it might even get rejected, it might take 2-3 days. So when you look at, I was always in Africa as like a semi-tourist. I would be there for 3 to 6 months at a time, sort of go in, learn what I need to do, get the research, and then sort of fly out again. But you'd get really nice connections with people there. Like, I'm still in communication with Guillaume in the Ivory Coast, or with Bishir, who was our mechanic turned driver in Tunisia. And with all of them, I'm sending them sats randomly at times, just being like, yo, what's up? And, sending them 5,000 sats or something. And I can't do that with cash, can I? I can't do that with a bank. There's no way. So yeah, I guess it was all like a weird sort of slow orange pilling, but not from the use case of the Western world. Because in the Western world, the whole thing is it's a store of value. Bitcoin has always been this investment, when ultimately it's not. It's peer-to-peer cash, right? It's cash that we can just send to each other with no intermediary. And intermediaries throughout history have just done people over. They've got rich, and that centralization of power has always ended up with this inequality that has created the West versus the global South, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's like humans just can't help themselves, and self-interest is in some cases a incredibly powerful force for good, but in other cases tips the scales in the other direction, whether or not people intended it to. I'm not someone that doesn't believe in the lack of evil. Like, evil exists, there's no doubt about it. But in this particular conversation, like, I worked in the startup space for many years, and we were always hustled, like, solve the biggest problems. And I was looking at a bunch of different things. I won't bore you with all the failed startups that I went through, but I suddenly realized that Bitcoin money is actually the biggest problem. Like, holy shit, this is so massive. I can't even comprehend how big it is. And hence here we are having this conversation, and sparked into, changing all sorts of things in my life and going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, so to speak. But I totally agree. I came to it from a store of value perspective. So I mentioned briefly offline at the start that I had an inheritance to manage after my father's death. And so I'm looking at inflation. I'm then having to invest, and I'm looking at lots of different asset classes, and investing is really hard. And it goes wrong all the time. And so coming across something that is able to store your purchasing power over time with very little, if not zero, counterparty risk is like, wow. And it completely changes the definition of ownership. Like your friend's example, you mentioned that he keeps it on his phone because he owns it. Whoa. Like, oh, I own a house. Well, do you? You have a piece of paper for a building within a government jurisdiction. Look at what happened the last 2 years. They'll just shut you down if they want to. So do you really own that? Or whatever other different example we can think of. So yeah, I really chime with you in terms of like how the different use cases are so interesting. And particularly the conversations I've had lately with Farida and Master Guantai, the use of Bitcoin in Africa, it's going gangbusters, and they don't care about short-term volatility because it's simply a better solution to what they were offered before. And they also know that from a corruption perspective, the status quo is an absolute shit show. So anything else is going to be a better option. Wow,
it's why pitching Bitcoin. It's why pitching Bitcoin in countries like this is just so much easier as well.
Well, you don't
like
need to. They just get it straight away, right? That's what they both said to me. You don't need to pitch Bitcoin to people that live in Togo or Kenya, because they just get it straight away. And that's why it's always fun when you see these headlines about like Bitcoin has no value. And you're like, I just spoke to someone who lives in Nairobi, and people are using Bitcoin every day. And it's happening faster and faster and faster and faster. Like, you're literally lying to whoever reads your shitty newspaper. But before I go on too much around there, Joe,
please send me some.
Yeah. So the role that you were doing with this Bloomberg subsidiary, talk me through the kind of stories or work that you were doing, and what kind of
Mhm.
skills did you pick up through that process? So I'm a big believer in you learn on the job, right? So
Yeah.
you go through university or whatever you might have done, and suddenly you're in a job, you're being paid to be there, and you have to just figure it out. So,
Mhm.
so what
Mhm.
are some of the things that you learned during that role that you've taken forward into what you're now doing?
Sure. So effectively, if I explain how we did it, it'll sort of explain or
Go for it.
maybe
Yeah, yeah,
illustrate
whatever
the
you think
skills
works
that were
best.
accrued. But so we'd get dropped in a country, and if there was a team that had been there in the past 4 or 5 years or so, we'd tap into their pool of contacts anyway. But it was effectively like running a mini startup where you had to gather research, which you could then package up and put into articles or big reports. Like our big moneymaker was these sort of annual reports that we'd sell on these countries. So say I'm dropped in Abidjan. First thing is, okay, we need somewhere to live. So, you're looking at, are there Airbnbs nearby? Are there people we can speak to? Like, we need to get somewhere that's like safe enough and comfortable enough to live, not be robbed. We need a driver. We need an office. We need all these things that are going to make it so that we can get this sort of mini research business on the ground. Usually we'd have a big sponsor that would be paying for like our visa into the country and our flight. So they would help us to some extent. And that might be like a governmental office, it'd be like a subsidiary of the Ministry of Trade or something that realized that, okay, this is going to be read by Bloomberg investors or Bloomberg readers. Therefore, we need to talk about how the cocoa industry is booming. So that was sort of the reason why they would pay for us to be there in the first place. And so once we've got like a place to live, someone to drive us around, and obviously that requires the recruitment of these people and an office space. And it's a question of, okay, we need to work out what is actually going on in this country from a macro level, because we need to write this report in the next year that explains essentially what is going on in the Ivory Coast, for business people looking at, okay, where are the opportunities? Where can I put some money and maybe get 1,000x return? Maybe I just park it in a hotel and it accrues and it keeps its value over time. So that would be a question of, okay, everyone's always looking for like a godfather in the network, like that one person that can sort of introduce you to other people in that network. And from then you're sort of in the you're in sort of the business network.
Mhm.
In Trinidad and Tobago, for example, it was the surfers. I don't know why, but the surfers were just very like rich people. In Portugal, say, you'd get there through golf.
Mhm.
In the Ivory Coast, it was a lot of drinking in bars. So all really fun things to do, right? But it was really quite an old school way of networking and getting
Mhm.
to who the business people are, who the key opinion leaders are, and who the decision makers are, because they're usually going to be the people that know where the investment opportunities are and therefore find the stories to write about. Say a chemical plant has just built a new sort of wing to their factory or something. Okay, that could be interesting. They might be looking for investors there. Or say, the cocoa plant example from earlier. Maybe they've had a real glut in the supply this year. All these sort of little things that are going on that you can then do sort of feeder articles from. Inevitably, me talking to my driver about Bitcoin, I was like, no way, like I need to write about Bitcoin for effectively Bloomberg. And so I did actually manage to write a couple of pseudo FUD articles, I'd say, about Bitcoin and crypto while working in some of these countries. One of them was actually on the remittance piece. My name is no longer there because I asked them to remove it, but it was basically like Bitcoin remittance into French-speaking West Africa has gone up X% as per usefultulips.com and some, Glassnode or whatever. And then a few interviews of people on the ground. And then a couple of sound bites from people that would say, Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, Bitcoin is a scam. And then it would say, Bitcoin is a risky investment and is part of the cryptocurrency asset class, which shouldn't be touched. And then finally, Bitcoin uses more energy than, I don't know, Denmark.
Yeah.
Avoid Bitcoin.
The
So
real, the
it'd
real
be
like
that kind of reporting.
the kind of the final kind of slamming of the door at the end, just like forget it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And actually, well, so
Super
Joe,
balanced.
um, how cool. I mean, we've only got an hour, but I can only imagine, like, drinking in a few bars in the Ivory Coast takes you to some interesting places, and it's that kind of experience that I love so much about getting away from home and going and trying new things. And I'm sure that was a huge amount of fun. What I'd love to draw on though is this concept of FUD and
Mm-hmm.
what is information, what's real, what's not real.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question one of my followers, shout out to Tricky, and he came out and said, what can Bitcoiners do to combat the onslaught of negative press? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he's just said the FUD, the negative outlook, the straight up lies. So someone like yourself that's now working for Coin Telegraph, perhaps you can talk a little more about them as well, and how you ended up transitioning into this new role from the previous one. The world's a difficult place to decipher. So finding trusted sources for information is really an important part of, survival in today's world. And Bitcoin in particular is this incredible source for truth in terms of its design. Once you dig under the onion and start peeling back the layers, what does it mean as a journalist then in terms of how this all fits together, and what are some of your thoughts on this?
Sure. So this is something that beleaguers me, and I really struggle with, because I've tried to write about Bitcoin from the inside, in the sense that I was at mainstream media publications and I was trying to write positively about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Okay.
And I couldn't, as I struggled, and inevitably it led to me leaving the company I worked for.
Sorry, just for me to jump in, I wouldn't normally do this and cut you off, but when you say you couldn't, what do you mean you couldn't? Why couldn't you do that?
I mean, I would have lots of conversations with colleagues. This was like behind closed doors, where I'd be like, listen, this Bitcoin thing, I think we might have got it wrong, because I've seen it firsthand, which is,
primary research is saying otherwise. Yeah.
Which we never do in the, journalism industry anymore anyway. That sort of thing is kind of dying, which is just bizarre. But that's a whole other thing. Anyway, so I talked to them, like, listen, I've done all the necessary research into the blockchain thing, and I'm pretty sure it's not working, as we would reveal in countless reports. And then I bring up the Bitcoin thing, which is obviously the only use case of blockchain technology on a big scale that works. And I say to them, listen, I've read a few books, I've listened to a couple of podcasts by now, and I've seen firsthand people that are saving in Bitcoin, or that are using remittance, for Bitcoin. And I've also, reported on it. But every time we report on it, we report it in this light, which is Bitcoin is this very risky thing that investors should not go towards. Why do we have to frame it in that way? Why can't I start to write about other things, like this fella in Zimbabwe that's accepting Bitcoin for payments for his cars, or the guy in Mozambique who's switching between Bitcoin on the Lightning Network for his prepaid SIM cards for his phone? And every time it was like, nah, I don't think so. No, I don't think you got it right there. No, like, because inevitably they're going to say no, because they haven't, not that they've done the work, but they've never picked up a Bitcoin book or read or listened to a Bitcoin podcast.
And when you say they, this is sorry to cut in again, Joe, but when you say they, this is literally your management structure within the organization. Yeah. And so there's basically one or two tiers above you, and they just slam the door straight away, because Bitcoin just isn't a subject that on an editorial level they want you to be spending any time on. Or do you think they've specifically got regulations in place that says like squash this thing?
Yeah, I mean that would be comforting to think, but I think it's more just ignorance, and just the idea that they don't understand it. And the narrative that we all live through is that Bitcoin is bad. You talk to most people on the street nowadays. I mean, it's much better now than it used to be maybe 5 years ago, but people will just bring up some horrible thing about its volatility. Okay, that's true. Its energy use, or the fact that
criminals use it.
All these like silly FUD things that we're exposed to. Because that's the narrative, that's just what's accepted, and people don't look under the surface of it. And that's the same for lots of topics in the world, and that's kind of why Bitcoin is also easy to disregard and just brush to one side, because people just say, oh, you're just being conspiratorial. Like, obviously there aren't some, obviously the fiat system isn't broken in such a way. So yeah, I would have these conversations with colleagues, with management, trying to change the angle with which we approach Bitcoin and this, borderless money that is effectively improving people's lives around the world. And each time it wouldn't be knocked back, but it would just be an awkward conversation. And I was there like, what am I doing here? Why am I trying to pitch this thing, which no one really cares about, and no one is seeking to change their mind about either. And on top of that, I was like a senior editor for them, but I wasn't high enough up to actually change things properly. There was definitely more rungs above me. Yeah. And so after a while I was like, well, this is frustrating. I want to go work somewhere where I can actually write about this honestly. and so started looking at crypto jobs. And then the question was, okay, do I want to work for a Bitcoin magazine where I can just spout about Bitcoin all day long?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I want to go to somewhere, like a Coin Telegraph, where I can talk about Bitcoin to people that understand crypto but aren't quite there? I mean, that sounds arrogant, but you know what I mean? Like, aren't, you know what I mean? A lot of these projects are going to be at zero in 10 years' time. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
So why not try to help educate people, entertain people, like subtly orange pill people through reporting of good stories of Bitcoin around the world. And that's kind of what I've been trying to make my sort of core output now. And that's kind of to the point of the I forget the guy that tweeted to you with the question, but how do we improve, or
Well,
how do we
his
undermine this
handle is
FUD?
Tricky at Planned
Tricky.
Earth. Shout out to Tricky if he's out there somewhere. Maybe a
Well, there
she,
you
who
go.
knows? A he or she, or a they, who knows?
Or they, yeah. So Tricky at Planned
Okay,
Earth.
Joe,
It's
cool.
really
So,
hard.
how interesting. So, if I could kind of distill this. So you're someone who was working in the journalism business, was traveling the world, and was being asked to do primary research of interesting business opportunities. And one of the primary bits of research you did was the use of Bitcoin, and the organization you were working for just shut down your primary research. And so you said, fuck this, I'm going to go and find an organization that's willing to let me talk about this.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, I love that. And so you found this place. So I don't know much about Coin Telegraph. Please tell a little, tell me, or tell those of us that are listening that don't know much about them. And
Shall I shill it to you?
sorry?
Shall I shill it to you?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. Because I think it's important to, if they're owned by a bunch of shitcoiners, then the fact that letting you talk about Bitcoin is interesting, and the fact that you found someone who's got a more open mind to the stories that Bloomberg or whoever their subsidiary wasn't willing to be open-minded to, that's a step in the right direction. And it depends what you define as Bitcoin adoption. I think you can get people telling you that we're at 0.1% and people telling you that we're at 10%. I've had literally those bigger, broader ranges of adoption rates in the last just few weeks. So it depends, right? If someone's got £10 worth of Bitcoin, well, they've got £10 worth of Bitcoin. If they've got 90% of their net wealth in Bitcoin, well, they've adopted it as a savings technology. There's completely different levels of adoption. But a big part of that adoption curve is education. And so really what a journalist like yourself is doing is educating people. And I love that. And that's what this Bitcoin podcast is also about, just talking about people's individual stories to it. So yeah, a bit more about Coin Telegraph, please, and what incentivizes them in terms of their business structure, and why does that enable you to write about Bitcoin? And then equally, like, what's some of the best stories you've been able to write as a result, and some of the feedback you've got from them?
Sure. So Cointelegraph is one of the oldest sort of crypto publications. It's a media platform, but it also does journalism within that. So you've got the news, reviews, analysis, that sort of thing. But you've also got sponsored content, advertorial, and the things that effectively pay my salary. And because it is such an old publication, I haven't actually met the owner, but I would assume that he was into Bitcoin, right? Like if you're in the crypto space in 2013, that was when, I don't know, like things like Dash and stuff like that were around.
Yeah.
There were definitely alts existing back then, but you would hope that he would have and I'm sure he does have the vision of Bitcoin and had understood Bitcoin back then. Otherwise, why would you want to create this sort of project that takes coin and puts it in the name of the company, right? In terms of why it writes about all the other coins under the sun, is because it's also a business, right? And businesses have got to be profitable. And as I'm sure your DMs on Twitter or whatever accounts you use are full of, it'll be someone saying, please, can you talk about my NFT project? Please, can you talk about my new token, or whatever it is, because there are huge marketing budgets behind all these teams. And purely because the reason of there is no marketing team behind Bitcoin, is there? So it's very hard to make money off Bitcoin and only Bitcoin, which is presumably why Bitcoin Magazine has gone down the route of conferences and sort of things behind paywalls, because it is I think it must be really hard to manage a full Bitcoin only business. These all sound like excuses, but they're more just like a framework within how Cointelegraph operates.
It resonates with me, and I love this subject because without really meaning to, I've founded a small media business, and
Yeah.
I actually have signed a contract for my first sponsor to start in September. So I'm not going to reveal that quite
Congrats.
yet. Yeah, it's very exciting. So, like all startup projects, that first paying customer, holy shit, you've got some traction, you've got some product market fit. You know, who else might pay you? How can you improve your service to them? And that they're a Bitcoin exchange, so I can say that much, and they're incentivized to get people to exchange fiat for Bitcoin. And it
Mhm.
makes sense, right? I'm a Bitcoin only podcast sending customers in their direction. But what intrigues me is the very business model behind media. So
Mhm.
a simple example, I have a friend who works here in Melbourne. He's actually now switched to go and work for Spotify advertising, but he was working for one of the big networks here in Australia. And he was an advertising guy dealing with one of the large supermarket chains here. And for example, the news desk was supposedly autonomous to the ad team. But the supermarket chain, if there was for example, a story that was, X supermarket chain is underpaying employees on Christmas Day, it's a negative
Mhm.
story. It's no longer, the family's best friend with low prices forever. They're like an evil kind of, corporate Goliath. And the advertising team gets a phone call from the supermarket, says, look, we pay you a shitload of money to advertise during the sport on a Friday night. We do not want your news desk talking about this story. Shut it down now.
Mhm.
So the incentive model for a media business using this type of advertising model is to do whatever the customer wants, which is to tell good stories about companies or people that may not be that good. In a Bitcoin world, in theory, you could, for example, fund a project with today £50,000 worth of Bitcoin. You sit it on the balance sheet for 4 years. If the purchasing power increases at the rate we think it might, you might suddenly have £500,000 worth of cash to play around with. And suddenly you can almost have advertising free media. You have an education business, you create information. So as someone who's worked in the journalism space, like where do you see this all going? And what are the incentive models that are going to be in play in the future? And how might that change our perception of information and how we trust information and the sources we get it from? And
Mhm. Mhm.
just for example, the last couple of years, there's no doubt that there's been huge censorship online from all sorts of different businesses for all sorts of different types of interest groups for all sorts of reasons. Not to go down that hole, but that's
Mm.
largely because the information that people consume is paid for by advertising. And
Mhm.
so the
Mhm.
business model is do whatever the customer says, right? So yeah, any thoughts on that and where it might go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it went through my head when I was trying to swap from mainstream media to crypto media, because I was like, okay, I need to eat still. I
Yep,
need to be
of
employed.
course.
Do I go it alone, or do I build up my own brand and build trust with customers, and effectively do what you're doing, which is making yourself the platform from which you
Mhm.
can then monetize and then live. And the inevitably, yeah, there's a lot of conflict of interest. I'm not sure how to frame it, between the fact that Cointelegraph is a media company that also is supporting crypto companies, and we all go to the same conferences, we all share the same advertising spaces, and when reading pieces, you also have to read it through the lens of, okay, everything has a bias because there is no such thing as unbiased anyway. And why would there be a bias between, say, I don't know, Celsius and Cointelegraph back in January, February, March time of this year? And there are also lots of PR teams that are in my inbox every morning saying, "Hi, please can you write about this? Hi, please can you write about that?"
Really? Wow.
And it's all, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's inevitable. And regardless of what news desk you're on, people want that seal of approval. If I was at the Bloomberg stuff, then yeah, I'd also get companies saying, "Please write about me. Please do a profile about this. Here's some quotes. Please insert this into your piece." And that's just normal in whatever sort of journalism field you're in. But obviously, the crypto world, it's new, it's unregulated, it's fast. Things go up in flames one day to the next.
Mm.
So yeah, if anyone's an avid reader of all the crypto journals, then just know there's a lot of money changing hands, and that's perfectly normal. And a lot of stuff, it will say sponsored, but everything has a bias, and that's something to be wary of. And in terms of what should the future look like, or what would I like the future to look like of this sort of journalism world, ideally, you'd get to websites and you just tap your laptop or something with your card or scan it with a phone, and you pay like 5 sats to read an article, or there'll be some sort of subscription model to get the information from the people you like. And I thought that Twitter plus Bitcoin would have got us there already, but we're not quite there yet, right? We have paywalls behind certain, big magazines like the New York Times or whatever. But in terms of, like, say, for your content, you distribute that through Spotify, right? And therefore you're not really getting paid by Spotify, you'll get paid by the sponsors. But why can't you just have your own channel, Lightning channel, which someone, sends sats to, and that's your payment for creating this content? That there has to be a way of sort of, we've seen the breakdown of, the printing press. The printing press was information. The printing press was books. The internet was information, and now Bitcoin is money. What's it going to take to break down the news cycle into being more trustworthy and more point of reference? We sort of have it with Twitter. Like, I don't know if you remember at the start of the Ukraine war, there was a journalist that was sort of documenting his travels outside of Ukraine. And what he was saying was so much more insightful. And I learned so much more than all of, like, the Western press. And so, like, nowadays, all of my news effectively comes from Twitter, because I know then a couple of clicks and a phone call, I can get to the source of the person that's in, for example, the burning house, or, the war zone, whatever it may be. So yeah, I'm just wondering, how do we get to that next step of, okay, I can pay you for that information or the reporting that you do at source, rather than it being held in this sort of prison or the centralized entity, which then edits the way in which it disputes information. On the other hand, it's also really important that we do have good editors, and we do have good curators of information, and we do have those people that know how to shape a story, and know how to write well, and know how to edit well. So I think there's always going to be sort of a space for that too. And there's always going to be a space for, like, really good journalism. And, because that's also one of the amazing things about being a human, right? Is that we can entertain all these different thoughts at any time. And we are all full of hypocrisy and juxtapositions and contrasts, right? So I think it's important to have the two spaces. But yeah, I would love to be able to do the first one, which is, just people, I get paid directly to do the reporting. And I can write about whatever I want to write about when I want. But at the same time, yeah, love Coin Telegraph. Go read Coin Telegraph. Great content.
Yeah, no. And people will after this conversation, for sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned briefly, I spent some time in the digital product space doing startups, and this idea of value for value, I think, is extremely interesting. So, a platform like Fountain, for example, where you can go and stream sats directly to a podcast host, and that host can have it set up in such a way that all sats received for that specific episode are split, for example, 50-50 between you and I. So for appearing as a guest on the show, you get 50% of all of the sats that get sent to Bitcoin with Jake. And
I didn't know this part of it.
Yeah,
I knew that you
they've
can
added
obviously
another
stream sats
layer.
to, okay.
To be honest, I haven't had the best experience with Fountain as a product. I hold products to quite a high level, having been in the space, and it's a bit clunky. It doesn't really work for me very well. I'm immediately like,
and it heats up your phone, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it
I'm
gets
just
so
like,
hot.
dropped. Sorry, but it will improve because they're still going, right? And people are using it, and it's all about traction and then speed of product development. But it strikes me that, like, Twitter, for example, it's corrupt. It so obviously is willing to echo certain stories and completely suppress others. So at some stage, maybe a similar, like, equivalent to Twitter will be built on top of Bitcoin, in which every profile has a Lightning wallet and can send and receive micropayments, and therefore, as a journalist, you could be based on this piece of software, and you could pump out stories, and you get paid for each bit of content specifically. It's very, very exciting, I agree. And the cool thing about it is, obviously, it's more of a demand pull rather than supply push type scenario, where if you can create a following of 100 people that love what you do and ask for more of it, you just create more of it. In some ways, it's kind of similar to, like, Netflix building this huge viewership of people streaming TV, and they can watch what's popular, so they can then predict what kind of content to create to keep people on their platform. This is something that traditional production houses, like, they're fucked. They have no idea in comparison to what Netflix can see as to what to create for future box office hits, etc.
And then
and
they
I
can
would see that
tailor
being so
tailor the advert you see based on who you are as well. So say they've made that amazing content, they can then show you the fight scenes, whereas they can show your partner, say, the romantic scenes, if that's, that's how you're. a
Is
couple
that
works. Yeah,
right?
it's
I
mad.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
it
So there's
goes
some
really
crazy
granular.
stuff that goes on. Um, but what's cool about this though is it would change the incentive model for the creation of information. And instead of creating clickbait to have advertising banners next to, you'd be incentivized to actually like do some deep reporting. Yeah, how cool. Okay. And so is there any like locations or sources for information, obviously your articles, Joe, that you would direct people towards at this stage for high quality Bitcoin related journalism? Or perhaps this is like spitballing with you just for a second, an opportunity for the future where it's like, okay,
Mm,
well, we actually see a space here where no one's really properly doing hard primary research that you can then actually sell to people because it's such high quality, let's make it happen type thing. Which I'd be
mm.
all up for helping do. Do you know what I mean? I think it's it's all about following opportunities.
Yeah, I know Gigi's working quite hard on the whole value for value thing in the journalism reporting space, and
Okay.
making it so you can directly stream sats to that creator or reporter of that information. And I think in general, the space, we are the loudest voices in sort of Bitcoin Twitter, crypto Twitter, are the big profiles that just retweet stuff that they've just stumbled across. So
Mm.
there's very little at source reporting, and it's something I really pride myself in. Like, I'm always the first to fly out somewhere or travel to somewhere, or to jump on a call and be like, yo, I've heard this thing. Is this legit? Why are you saying this? Who's told you to say it? These sorts of questions. Because a lot of the reporting that we see, and this is in the mainstream as well, is just hearsay. And that's just not good enough, especially when it's then being bleated out to
It's bullshit,
the
right?
accounts.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just it's kind of fanning the flames of fraud. It's just not even true.
Mm.
Even if it isn't, I mean, no one cares, right? It's
Yeah.
like when you see like a video of something that's related to the caption will relate it to an extremely kind of topical current affair, and then
Hmm.
someone will come along and say that was a video taken 4 years ago in a different country.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And all of these
Yeah.
big accounts are reposting this thing that someone's created, thinking it's true when it's not, right? Because they haven't double checked it. Um,
And there's no they've clearly made an error there, and there's never a question of, okay, we'll just delete the tweet and carry on doing what we're doing. There was no sort of thinking of, oh, maybe we're misinforming people here.
mm,
And at which point it's like, okay, first time is ignorance, okay, let you off. Second time, well, you're clearly misinforming people. That's
mm.
just not on. Why would you continue to do that? I would. Yeah, and that happens a lot with the big Bitcoin and crypto accounts, and it just means that people are more misled and people are more misinformed, and we end up with more of the same problems. And you'd hope that in the Bitcoin space, where we're all supposed to be low time preference and thinking about the future, we wouldn't need as much of this jumping on clickbaity style stories, and yet it still exists.
Yeah, and
So, yeah, Bitcoin.
it's kind of endemic, isn't it? And actually, so shout out to Michael Dunworth. I haven't met Mike yet, but he's a good friend of mine. A friend of mine, Peter's brother, and we were talking on Twitter about original content. He's like, original
Mhm.
is the key. And so
Mhm.
what you're kind of describing here would really kind of chime with what Michael was saying, is that would be the interesting area to focus on. It's like, if you're a source of original and high quality content, then people will come and find you essentially. Um,
Yeah.
and to
90%
chime,
of my work, by the way, is original.
yeah,
I
nice.
just wanted to say that.
Well,
Like,
and then you get that
I am
phrase, don't
constantly
you, that the best artists steal. So
yeah.
who knows, right? I actually saw an article just today that was posted, or must have been in the last day or so, about El Salvador and the
Mhm.
tourism that's happening there. So can you talk to me a little bit about that story? Because I think that country is just such an interesting topic at the moment, in that, at one end of the scale, you've got a politician who has created a more and more authoritarian regime, but is absolutely banging the drum of Bitcoin in such a way that you kind of have to say, well, you're definitely improving things for most people there. So
Mhm.
maybe it's okay. But yeah, I think you mentioned some kind of crazy tourism stat where there's like 99% more tourism than there was, or something. Just talk us through that as an example of one of your latest articles.
Sure. So this is actually more of a reblog than original content for my sins, but it was one of those pieces
Oops.
where, yeah. This is so the so basically the national paper picked it up and it was front page news, El Diario Salvador, and it basically said, tourism increases 83% year on year. And inevitably all the big Bitcoin and Twitter accounts just retweet that. So I ring them up yesterday afternoon and I was like, where does this stat come from? And I get through to the Ministry of Tourism, who's saying, actually, we didn't even create this stat. It comes from the World Travel Organization, the WTO. So then I speak to them and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Is this legit? And they say, yes. The figure comes from the fact that the 82% or whatever it is because it's actually down 19% on the negative levels of 2019. It was a very convoluted way of saying basically that tourism this year has been firing in El Salvador. So I speak to them, and then I speak to a couple of the Bitcoiners that have been to El Salvador recently and be like, do you really get the sense that lots of people are flocking to El Salvador? Inevitably, they say yes, because, they're Bitcoiners and they want the El Salvador experiment to go well. And then I spoke to a few of the people that actually managed the Escape to El Salvador project and said, asked them about the 3 Bitcoin residency plan, the idea that you could buy residency in El Salvador for 3 Bitcoin. And so, it's emerged part of this volcano bonds thing. So it was a reblog in the sense that I didn't find that figure originally, but I did speak to the sources and find out where this stat actually came from, because lots of stats are thrown around and no one knows where they actually came from, and sometimes they can come from just hearsay and then they become a fact after a while. There used to be a really good Radio 4 program that used to debunk a lot of these facts that would come up. Was it called like More or Less or something? But in terms of the original content, and this is something that Cointelegraph prides itself on and is amazing for, we pitch stories all the time that will be, we'll get a tip off from someone. Like last week, it was about Gibraltar and how these coffee chains, Costa Coffee and Hotel Chocolat and people like that, were about to accept Bitcoin. And I was like, this is awesome. Like we're in Europe and we're paying Bitcoin over the Lightning Network in a Costa Coffee. It just felt very strange, and it flew in the face of that argument that, no one's going to use Bitcoin to pay for their coffee. And so I flew to Gibraltar, spoke to the manager of the chains, spoke to the Minister of Finance in Gibraltar, and then spoke to the company. It was actually Coin Corner that partnered with them to get this partnership over the line. And I published all this, and then 2 minutes later, all the big Twitter accounts are retweeting this information without using the source. And I'm like, why bother? Why should I even go to, find the source of this information, set up interviews with people, network to get into certain boardrooms and, ministerial offices, when ultimately whatever you research and report is going to be used by someone else to disseminate that information. I'm being a bit cynical here, but
no, that's interesting though. So that's that's a sense of frustration over ownership of information and a lack of value in return for the work. It's kind of like copywriting a song, right? You've created this piece of information that is unique to you, and you want to make sure that you get paid for it indefinitely. And so why isn't that the case, like with a primary piece of research like what you explained? And yeah, I mean, how might that be different in a world of value for value? I don't know, but it's certainly something that will change, right? Like if the incentive model is such that people get paid for retweeting your content with your name in it, i.e. they share in the spoils of their work, then maybe that wouldn't happen. Does that make sense? I don't know how that would work though, but gosh, how interesting. And what I really hear there though, Joe, is that the methodical process that you go through to curate information and actually clarify that things are correct. Like I will forever now read your articles in a more trusting way. There'll be other people listening to this that will be the same, which is great to hear.
Thanks.
But it's also like journalism is a great profession that has been unfairly kind of tainted lately just because of a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that's been thrown around, in my opinion. And I now don't trust a lot of stuff, right? But
I don't either.
There are real journalists out there doing real stuff, and somehow it's about homing in on them and really just listening to the right people. And
I've been misled as well a few times by the PR stuff. It's very hard. Even this sounds. It's hard even to be a journalist nowadays, because even when you speak to the source of information, you're questioning yourself. Okay, and why are they leaking this to me? Like if we get because obviously we're privy to information on a daily basis that we're obviously not publishing as well. And there's always that question of, okay, what's in it for them if they use us as a platform to share this information? And that's natural for any journalistic platform. But yeah, there's a lot of joke journalism now that's just pay for click stuff, and it's very, very hard. I mean, I'm still trying to make sense of the whole place while also trying to create original content. And I've kind of settled on my own niche, which is positive human interest stories where people are using Bitcoin in their daily lives to make it better. And I've also that's a healthy. There's not some company behind the scenes telling. I don't know. I'm trying to scroll through an example now. A guy that just was tipped Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. No one's getting rich off him doing that. A guy that a cat was sick on his node and it took his node offline. These are very silly examples, but there's no one's being hurt, no one's being ripped off, and there's certainly no risk of someone's funds being frozen in an exchange because of this sort of reporting. But it's a bit of a tightrope that's being walked.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Joe, listen, an hour has flown by. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Final question for you is, where can people reach out if they want to get in touch?
At Joe Nakamoto is my name on Twitter. Or
you're Satoshi's brother, I assume, that you just haven't told us about.
we are all relatives of Satoshi, I think. It was also because it rhymed. But yeah, that's the best way to reach out. My awesome. DMs are open, and yeah, if you have fun Bitcoin stories to share with me, then A, I love hearing them, and B, I love reporting them. So please, drop my DMs and we'll set up a chat, or come visit.
I'd encourage you to have a dig through some of the back catalogue of conversations I've had, because there's so many people with interesting stories that have been taking day-to-day action changes. And obviously, like, you probably know most of them already, but get in touch.
Yeah, I've written about a few of them.
You probably know most of them already, but it's quite amazing what this thing's doing out there every day, and it doesn't get talked about enough, and that's obviously what we're here for. So, well, Joe, cheers. Thank you so much for your time.
Master One Tower was the new one, and I've got a call with him next week. So thanks.
You do, yeah, brilliant. Yes, that's a great example. So here's a guy who taught himself how to forex trade, and is based in Nairobi, and he's helping to translate Bitcoin content from English or whatever into African languages that potentially access another 500 million people. What? Do you know what I mean? That's massive. And shout out to Master Guanta if he's listening. Awesome story. All right, Joe, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Jake. My pleasure.